The hospital corridors were silent. Not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that warns you something irreversible is about to happen. A royal aide stood motionless near the doorway, eyes fixed on the red light above the intensive care ward. Behind that door lay King Charles III, pale, frail, and fading. And beside his bed sat the one person he trusted more than anyone else, his sister, Princess Anne. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was then, according to sources close to the family, that Anne leaned forward, took her brother's trembling hand, and whispered something no one expected to hear. "Charles," she said softly, "if this is truly your wish, I will see it done." That wish, whatever it was never meant to leave that room. But it did. Days later, as the press scrambled for updates on the king's health, whispers began to circulate within the palace walls. Whispers of a final wish so shocking, it left even Prince William speechless and Prince Harry reportedly in tears. The king, in his final days, had made a decision that would change the monarchy forever. And that decision? He wanted Prince Harry, the exiled son, the rebel prince, the one who had walked away from royal life, to take the crown. But there was a catch, a condition that struck like lightning through the royal bloodline. Harry could only accept the crown if he returned to the United Kingdom and divorced Meghan Markle. Now, pause for a second and think about that. The very man who fought his entire life for acceptance, who broke away from the palace's grip to live freely in California, was suddenly being asked to give up the one thing he'd clung to the most, his marriage, to claim the one thing he'd sworn he never wanted, the throne. Why would King Charles make such a request? Why would a father, in his dying days, set such a painful condition for the son he once called his greatest disappointment? The answer lies not in the present, but in the past. Because, as Princess Anne would later reveal, this wasn't a decision born out of emotion or politics. It was something deeper, something written in the king's heart long before his coronation. It began decades ago, with a promise, a secret, and a prophecy that had haunted the House of Windsor for generations. But before we get there, we need to go back to the night everything changed. The night Princess Anne found the letter. It was a cold, misty evening at Balmoral Castle, and had returned alone after visiting her brother in the hospital, her mind swirling with emotion. Charles had been unusually calm that day, almost resigned, as if preparing for something inevitable. He'd spoken of legacy, of forgiveness, of unfinished business. And before she left, he'd handed her a sealed envelope marked in his handwriting, "For my sister's eyes only," and had stared at the envelope for hours before finally breaking the seal. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, and a single line that stopped her breath cold. "My final wish," the letter began, "is that my second son inherit the crown." There it was, in black ink and trembling script, the king's most private desire. Anne's heart sank. She knew what that meant. The monarchy wasn't just about tradition, it was about survival. And Charles, in his wisdom, or perhaps desperation, believed that the future of the crown depended not on William's stability, but on Harry's redemption. But why? What did Charles see in Harry that no one else did? To understand that, we must look at the man behind the monarch, the boy who grew up in the shadow of a mother's love and a father's expectations. Charles had always carried guilt. Guilt over Diana's suffering, guilt over the way her death fractured his sons, and guilt over the cold distance that followed. He'd spent years trying to repair what was broken, but by the time Harry and Meghan walked away in 2020, he knew he had failed. Still, a part of him never gave up hope. Privately, he'd often told, "And Harry will come home. One day he'll understand." And perhaps that's why, as his body began to weaken, Charles wanted to leave behind something greater than a crown. He wanted reconciliation. He wanted healing. But the price he attached to that healing, divorcing Meghan, would set off a storm the royal family had never seen before. Now imagine being in Anne's position. You've spent your entire life serving the monarchy with loyalty and restraint. You've never craved the spotlight, never saw drama. Yet here you are, holding the dying wish of your brother, the King of England, and realizing that fulfilling it could destroy the very institution you've spent your life protecting. Still, she made a promise. And Anne, if history has taught us anything, is not a woman who breaks her word. But before she could tell anyone, the secret slipped. Someone overheard a fragment of conversation, perhaps a royal aide, perhaps a medical staff member, and within 48 hours, the whispers reached Kensington Palace. Prince William was the first to hear. He reportedly froze in disbelief. "That's impossible," he said to Catherine, pacing across their living room. "He wouldn't do that to me. Not now." But he had. And the one person who could confirm it was the last person anyone expected, Princess and herself. When the news broke, the world was stunned. Headlines screamed of royal betrayal, the crown's crisis, King's secret successor. Buckingham Palace refused to comment. The Royal Communications Office issued a single line: "His Majesty's wishes remain private." But the silence only fueled the fire. Journalists began digging into Anne's visits to the hospital, her private calls to Clarence House, her uncharacteristic absence from several public events. And slowly, a picture began to form. A picture of a loyal sister burdened by the heaviest secret in royal history. Why her? Why did Charles confide this wish only to Anne? Because she was the one person he knew wouldn't twist it for power. Charles had always admired his sister's blunt honesty. Unlike the rest of the family, and never chased approval. She didn't care for public opinion. She didn't play politics. That's what made her the perfect guardian of his truth. But that truth was now tearing the family apart. As the king's condition worsened, the royal household grew divided. Some aides insisted the letter was never meant to be acted upon, that it was merely a dying man's sentiment. Others argued it was binding, a constitutional matter that could trigger an unprecedented succession review. Meanwhile, William's team worked behind the scenes, preparing for his eventual ascension. The palace was already printing coronation drafts bearing his name, but in a separate wing, and was sitting with the Archbishop of Canterbury, holding the letter in her lap and asking a question that shook even him. Does a monarch's final wish outweigh royal tradition? The Archbishop didn't answer immediately. He looked down, sighed, and said, "Sometimes, Princess, tradition bows to truth," and closed her eyes. She knew what she had to do. But across the ocean, another storm was brewing. When Prince Harry learned of his father's condition, sources say he was devastated. He wanted to fly home immediately, but Meghan reportedly advised caution. The couple was in the middle of legal negotiations, brand deals, and ongoing tensions with the press. Still, Harry's instincts pulled him back toward home, toward his father, toward the brother he hadn't spoken to in months. But then came Anne's revelation, and everything changed. A private message reached him through a trusted intermediary. It was short, handwritten, and unmistakably hers. "Your father's wish is clear. He believes you were meant to lead, but only if you return and renounce the life you've built in California." Harry reportedly stared at the letter for hours. His heart pounded. His mind raced. Was this real? Was this some twisted manipulation? Or was it, in fact, the one opportunity he'd been waiting for, to reclaim his place in the world he left behind? And yet, the price was unthinkable. To accept the crown, he'd have to give up the woman he'd risked everything for. Could he do it? Would he? That's the question that now divides the monarchy, the media, and millions around the world. Some say Charles's wish was an act of desperation, a final attempt to save his family from itself. Others believe it was an act of divine clarity, a vision passed down through generations. But whatever it was, it placed Princess Anne at the center of the storm, because she wasn't just revealing her brother's final wish. She was challenging the very foundation of royal destiny. And as news of her confession rippled through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, one thing became clear: the monarchy would never be the same again. But here's what no one realized then: Anne's revelation was only the beginning. Because in the days that followed, she would uncover a trail of letters, conversations, and royal documents stretching back decades, proving that this wish wasn't new. It was planned, it was promised, and it was written long before Charles ever took the throne. And the truth behind that plan, well, that's the part no one saw coming. Because hidden deep inside those letters was the name of someone who knew this day would come, someone who predicted it all: Diana, Princess of Wales. And her words would change everything. The air in Balmoral that night felt thicker than usual, like the castle itself was holding its breath. The rain fell in slow, whispering sheets against the ancient windows, and the fire in the drawing room burned low, too low for comfort. Princess Anne sat alone by the flames, the letter still trembling in her hands. The words her brother had written would not stop echoing in her head. My final wish is that my second son inherit the crown. She could hardly believe it. Her brother, the King of England, the man who'd fought for years to secure his place on the throne, was now passing it to the very son who had rejected the institution entirely. Why Harry? Why now? The questions wouldn't stop spinning through her mind. But beneath the confusion, a memory stirred, something Charles had once said in passing that now struck her like a thunderclap. One day, he'd told her quietly, "You'll understand why the red-haired one was always meant to lead," and had dismissed it as sentimental nonsense at the time. But sitting in that lonely castle, with the smell of rain and wood smoke hanging in the air, those words felt heavy with purpose. And then, the phone rang. It was late, too late for anyone to call casually. She answered hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Majesty requests your presence," came the voice on the other end. It was one of the king's private secretaries, the kind of man who never used unnecessary words. Immediately, and froze. "Is he?" "He's awake, and he's asking for you." When Anne arrived at the hospital, the corridors were dim, the air filled with the low hum of machines and the distant rhythm of rain against the windows. Charles was awake, propped up on pillows, his face pale, but his eyes, those unmistakable Windsor eyes, burned with clarity. "And," he murmured when she entered, his voice thin but steady, "close the door." She obeyed, and for a moment, the only sound was the hiss of oxygen and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Charles spoke. "I've made arrangements," he said. "They'll resist it. They'll call it madness. But it's the only way." And stepped closer. "What arrangements?" He smiled faintly. "The crown," he said simply. "It must go to Harry." Her breath caught in her throat. "You can't mean that." "I do," he replied, his tone soft but unshakable. "William is steady, reliable, but he's not ready to forgive. And the country needs a king who understands forgiveness." And wanted to argue, but something in his voice, some mixture of conviction and sorrow, held her back. "You think Harry would come back?" she asked finally. Charles nodded weakly. "If it meant redeeming his mother's legacy, yes. But only if he's free from what binds him now." And stomach twisted. "You mean Meghan?" Charles looked away, his eyes glistening. "You saw what she did to him. To us. She took him away from everything he was meant to be. But I don't blame her. Not entirely. I blame myself. I made him feel unwanted, unloved. And now he's running from everything that could make him whole." He paused, breathing shallowly. "But I can change that. My final act as king must be to bring him home." And shook her head, her voice trembling. "You're asking for something impossible. He won't leave her. You know that." Charles smiled sadly. "Then the monarchy dies with me." Those words hung in the air like smoke. Hours later, Anne sat alone in the king's study at Balmoral, staring into the fire. The old room smelled of parchment and cedarwood, filled with memories of their childhood, of the days when Charles would read history books aloud while she rolled her eyes and polished her riding boots. She thought about everything he had sacrificed for the crown, his marriage to Diana, his reputation, even his peace of mind. Now, in the end, all he wanted was for his sons to restore what he had broken. But could Harry ever be that man? She remembered his eyes as a child, bright, mischievous, full of warmth. Diana's spirit shone in him. But over the years, that light had dimmed, replaced by anger and defensiveness. She had seen it up close during the brief family gatherings after the Queen's death. Harry's voice sharp, Meghan's smile practiced, William's silence heavy. It wasn't a family anymore, it was a battlefield. And yet, Charles believed Harry was the only one who could save it. Why? Because Charles saw in Harry what no one else did. A man shaped by pain, capable of compassion born from loss. A man who, in his father's eyes, could heal the cracks Diana's death had left behind. But to do that, he'd have to make the ultimate sacrifice. The next morning, the storm had passed. Balmoral's lawns glistened under a gray Scottish sun, and called a private meeting with the Archbishop of Canterbury and the king's legal advisor, Sir Jonathan Kent. They gathered in the library, where centuries of royal portraits watched over them in silence. "His Majesty's wish is clear," and began, sliding the letter across the table. "But we must determine if it carries any constitutional weight." The Archbishop read the letter slowly, his brow furrowing. "This is not a formal decree," he said cautiously. It's a personal testament. Still, Sir Jonathan added, it carries moral weight. If the king's intent is documented, it cannot be ignored. And leaned back, crossing her arms. Then what happens if he dies before making it official? The room fell silent. Finally, the archbishop said, then it becomes your burden, princess, to ensure his truth is heard. And looked away. He's asking me to tear my family apart. Sir Jonathan met her gaze. He's asking you to save it. That night, she returned to Charles's bedside. His breathing was shallow, his hand cold in hers. And, he whispered, barely audible, do you remember what Mother said the night before her coronation? And frowned. She said many things. Charles smiled faintly. She said the crown is not a prize, it's a punishment. One must wear it willingly or not at all. He paused, closing his eyes. Harry doesn't want it. But he needs it. It's the only thing that can bring him back. And squeezed his hand. And what of William? Charles opened his eyes again, filled with tears. William will understand. In time. And wasn't sure she believed that. The next day, word spread quietly through the palace staff that Anne had been seen leaving the hospital with a sealed file. No one knew what it contained, but rumors flew like arrows. Some said it was Charles's will. Others claimed it was a draft of an abdication. In truth, it was something far simpler. And far more dangerous. It was a single-page document bearing the royal seal, addressed to the Privy Council, with one line written in the king's own hand. I wish for my successor to be my second-born son, Harry, and locked it away in her private safe. She couldn't bear to destroy it, and she couldn't bring herself to act on it, not yet, because somewhere deep down, a small voice whispered that this wasn't just a dying wish. It was destiny catching up. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Just days later, as Charles's condition took a sudden turn, the leak began. An unnamed senior royal insider told a journalist at the Times that Princess Anne was guarding a shocking royal succession request. Within hours, every news outlet across Britain ran variations of the same headline. Is Prince Harry the king's chosen successor? Royal confidant reveals Charles's dying wish. Crown crisis looms as king's letter emerges. By nightfall, the story had exploded worldwide. And back in Kensington Palace, Prince William was reading it on his phone. The color drained from his face. Tell me this isn't true, he muttered. Catherine looked up from the sofa, unsure what to say. And wouldn't leak something like that, she said carefully. There must be more to it. William shook his head. If father really said it, then everything changes. Everything. He walked to the window, staring out at the gray London sky. He's choosing the brother who left us. The one who made a mockery of all of this. He turned sharply to his wife. What does that make me? Catherine hesitated, her voice soft. Still his son. But William didn't answer. His eyes were somewhere else, on the throne that had always been his destiny. Back in Balmoral, and sat by the fire again, staring into the flames as thunder rolled in the distance. The world now knew part of the truth, but not all of it. The king's condition had deteriorated overnight. Doctors whispered in hushed tones. Nurses came and went with solemn expressions, and the royal family prepared for the inevitable. And wanted to tell Charles that she'd kept her word, that she'd protected his wish. But as she stood outside his hospital room, she overheard something that stopped her cold. Camilla was inside, her voice trembling with fury. You can't do this to William. You can't undo everything we built. Charles's voice, weak but unyielding, replied, It's not about William. It's about the future. Camilla's voice rose. You're destroying it. There was a long pause, then Charles spoke again. Perhaps it was never mine to build. And turned away, tears stinging her eyes. She'd never seen her brother so certain, and so broken. That was the moment she realized. Nothing she said, nothing anyone said, would change his mind. He had already chosen his path, and that path led straight to Harry. But the most shocking part of all wasn't what Charles said next. It was what Anne would discover just days later, hidden deep within the Balmoral archives, among the Queen's private correspondence. A document so old, so extraordinary, that it would prove this final wish wasn't new at all. Because long before Charles ever wore the crown, Queen Elizabeth herself had prepared for this moment. And her words, written decades earlier, would reveal that she too had foreseen the rise of the red-haired prince. But what exactly did the Queen write? And how could her secret file still change the line of succession, even after her death. That's where everything turns from family tragedy to royal prophecy. And it all begins with one name, Diana. Why would Diana's name resurface now, decades after her tragic death, in the middle of a royal crisis that threatened to tear the crown apart? Why would her ghostly presence feel closer than ever, as if she had known all along that this moment would come? The answer lay hidden within a simple leather-bound box stored deep inside Balmoral's private archives. A box Anne had never seen before. It was discovered by accident, and had been walking through the upper study, the same room the Queen used for private correspondence during her summer stays, when she noticed an unfamiliar chest tucked behind an old writing desk. It was labeled simply "Personal, do not remove." The seal was unmistakable, the late Queen's private crest embossed in gold. And hesitated. Breaking that seal felt like crossing a sacred line. But the words of her brother haunted her. Mother knew, Charles had whispered during one of his lucid moments. She saw it coming. She had to know. When and Pride opened the box, the scent of aged paper and lavender drifted out. Inside were dozens of letters, neatly stacked and tied with ribbon. Some bore Diana's handwriting, others the Queen's. The earliest dated back to the 1980s. But one envelope sat on top, marked with a single word that made Anne's pulse quicken: succession. She unfolded the document carefully, her eyes scanning the first lines. It wasn't an official royal decree. It was something far more intimate. "My dear Anne," it began, in her mother's familiar script. "If ever the House of Windsor finds itself divided, if ever the line of succession threatens the unity of our people, look not to the eldest by birthright, but to the one who embodies compassion." And read the next line aloud in disbelief. "For the future of the crown may rest upon the heart of the red-haired prince." Her breath caught. She read it again to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. The Queen, decades before her death, had written of Harry. But how? Why? And sat down heavily, her mind racing. The Queen was not a woman of emotion. She was a woman of duty. Every word she wrote had purpose. Was this simply metaphorical, a poetic reflection on family? Or had the Queen truly believed Harry was destined for something greater? She reached for another letter, this one from Diana to the Queen. The handwriting was softer, almost fragile, but the tone was unmistakably firm. "Your Majesty," it began, "I fear for what our sons will inherit. William will be the face of tradition, but it is Harry who carries the warmth of humanity. Do not let the crown harden him. If ever the time comes when compassion must lead over protocol, remember his heart." And sat back, stunned. Diana had written this just a few years before her death. And somehow, the Queen had kept it, hidden away, untouched, perhaps waiting for the right time. Now that time had come. When Anne presented these letters to the Archbishop the next day, his expression turned pale. "This changes everything," he whispered. Sir Jonathan, the legal advisor, frowned. "These are not legal documents. They are personal reflections. We cannot allow sentiment to dictate succession." Anne's voice hardened. "Tell that to the king." He based his entire decision on sentiment. And perhaps he was right too. The Archbishop nodded slowly. Maybe this was not coincidence. Maybe this was prophecy. And stared at the papers again. Then the prophecy has come due. But she couldn't shake the unease growing inside her. Because if Diana and the Queen had both foreseen this, what else had they known? What had they kept hidden all these years? Across the Atlantic, in Montecito, Harry sat by the window of his mansion, the California sun spilling across the floor. His phone buzzed with messages from aides, family, and friends, but one name stood out: Princess Anne. He opened the message cautiously. It contained a photo, grainy but clear, of a handwritten letter signed by his grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II. The caption read only, "You should see this." He read the lines over and over. The red-haired prince. The heart over the title. Compassion over duty. It was as if his grandmother was speaking directly to him from beyond the grave. But then the next message came. Another photo, this one of Diana's letter. And beneath it, Anne's note. "Your father's wish aligns with your mother's words. You were meant for this." Harry's stomach dropped. Was this a trap? A manipulation to lure him back into the fold? Or was this truly fate calling his name? Meghan entered the room, sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" Harry hesitated. "My aunt sent me something. Letters. From my mother. From the Queen." Meghan frowned. "Why now?" Harry looked at her, torn. Because they're saying father's dying wish was for me to be king. She froze. That's absurd. I know, he said quietly. But what if it's true? Her eyes darkened. And what if it's not? You think they'd hand you the throne after everything? You think they'd welcome me back? Harry's jaw tightened. They said it would only happen if I came home, alone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Meghan stepped back, her voice trembling with anger. So that's it. That's the price. You give them your loyalty, and they strip away your life. Harry didn't answer, because deep down, part of him wondered if that life, the royal one, was never really gone. Maybe it was waiting for him to reclaim it. Back in Balmoral, the royal household was descending into quiet chaos. William's advisors were pressing for a public statement. Camilla demanded clarification, but stayed silent. She knew every word would only inflame the storm further. Instead, she went to see her brother one last time. Charles was weaker now, his eyes half closed, but when Anne entered, he stirred. You found it, didn't you? He whispered, and nodded slowly. Mother's letter. And Diana's. A faint smile crossed his face. Then it's real. She sat beside him. Charles, this will destroy William. His voice was soft, but resolute. Or it will save him. And frowned. How? Because, he said, pausing to catch his breath, he will finally understand what I never did. That leadership isn't inheritance, it's grace. It must be given to the one who serves the heart, not the throne. And swallowed hard. You're speaking like a man who's already made peace with the end. Charles nodded weakly. Perhaps I have. Then he looked at her, his expression gentle but filled with weight. Promise me you'll tell them both. Promise me you'll tell them the truth. And took his hand. I promise. He smiled faintly, his voice barely a whisper. Then the crown is safe. The next morning, the palace issued a medical bulletin. His Majesty remains under close supervision. No major updates at this time. But those words meant little. Everyone knew the truth. He was slipping away. Outside Balmoral, reporters stood in the rain, cameras flashing, questions flying. Inside, Anne retreated to her room, rereading the letters until she could recite every word by heart. She thought about the Queen's warning. Look not to the eldest by birthright. And Diana's plea. Remember his heart. Could two women, from different generations, both have seen the same truth coming? It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like destiny trying to break through centuries of royal rigidity. Still, Anne wasn't sure the world, or the family, was ready for what came next. Because in a matter of hours, the king's secret would no longer be a whisper. It would become a declaration. That evening, a royal insider leaked a photo to the press. It showed a handwritten note on palace stationery bearing the king's seal and his unmistakable signature. It read, "To the Privy Council, in confidence. My chosen successor shall be my second-born son, Harry, Duke of Sussex." The world exploded. News outlets across Europe and America ran breaking headlines. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace. The British government held emergency meetings. And for the first time in modern history, even royal historians admitted they didn't know what would happen next. Was this a constitutional crisis, or a miracle in disguise? For Princess Anne, it was neither. It was a reckoning. She had fulfilled her promise. She had delivered her brother's wish. But in doing so, she had lit a fuse that would burn through the foundations of the monarchy. Because even as the world debated the legality of it all, one truth loomed larger than any law or letter. Harry now knew. And the decision of whether to wear the crown or not rested entirely in his hands. But the question remained, what would he do with it? Would he return home, alone, to fulfill a dying father's wish? Or would he stay where love had led him, and let the crown fall into chaos? That choice, his choice, would determine the future of the royal family. And as the sun set over Balmoral that night, Princess Anne stood by her window, watching the clouds roll over the hills, whispering to herself the one thought she couldn't shake. This is only the beginning. The storm that had been brewing for days finally broke over London. Sheets of rain lashed the palace gates, reporters huddled under umbrellas, and the world's eyes turned toward Buckingham Palace, waiting for an answer that no one was ready to give. Inside, Prince William sat at the long mahogany table in the private council room, his knuckles white as he gripped a stack of newspapers. The headlines screamed betrayal, madness, conspiracy. King chooses Harry. Succession in crisis. Future of the crown in doubt. Catherine stood near the fireplace, her face calm, but her eyes filled with quiet dread. She knew what this moment meant for her husband, not just politically, but personally. He had spent his entire life preparing for a destiny that now hung in limbo because of one letter, one signature, and one man who had walked away. "Say something," she whispered finally. William threw the papers down. "What am I supposed to say, Kate? That my father has lost his mind? That the monarchy is a joke? That the man who abandoned us now gets to be the hero?" His voice cracked. "He left us. He left me." Catherine moved closer. "He's still your brother." William laughed bitterly. "Not anymore. Not after this." For a long moment, there was silence, just the sound of rain against the windows. Then his voice dropped, low and trembling. "He was always her favorite. Father tried to hide it, but everyone knew. Diana adored him. And now, even in death, she's still choosing him." Catherine placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do," he said, his jaw tightening. "It's in her letters. It's in everything. Harry gets to be the golden son again, and I get to carry the burden." He looked up, eyes blazing. "Do you know what they called me as a boy? The heir. Do you know what they called him? The heart. Well, apparently, the heart wins." He turned away, staring into the fire. "But not if I can help it." Meanwhile, in Balmoral, Princess Anne was facing her own reckoning. The leak had turned her into an accidental villain. Royal aides avoided her gaze in the corridors. Advisors whispered that she had overstepped. And Camilla was livid. The Queen Consort confronted her in the drawing room, eyes red from tears and fury. "You've destroyed this family," she hissed. "You've turned Charles's final days into a circus." And didn't flinch. "Charles made his choice. You encouraged it." Camilla shot back. "You let him believe Harry could fix what's already broken. You let him rewrite history out of guilt." Anne's tone remained measured, but her eyes were cold. "He wasn't rewriting history. He was facing it." Camilla stepped closer, trembling. "You think Diana's ghost gives Harry a crown? You think her letters mean anything now? She's gone, Anne. We're the ones left to pick up the pieces." Anne's voice softened slightly. "Maybe that's the problem. You've been picking up pieces, but never the truth." Camilla's lip trembled, but she said nothing more. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her, and stood there for a moment, exhaling slowly. She had seen many royal tempests in her lifetime, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about succession. It was about reckoning, about a truth too long buried. In California, Harry hadn't slept for 2 nights. Every hour brought a new headline, a new theory, a new avalanche of speculation. Paparazzi swarmed outside the gates of their Montecito home. The phone rang endlessly. Meghan tried to stay composed, but the tension was visible. "This is exactly what they want," she said, pacing. "They want to drag you back there. They want you desperate enough to crawl home so they can own you again." Harry sat silently on the couch, staring at his phone. He had reread his father's letter more times than he could count. "Harry," she said sharply, "don't you dare even think about it." He looked up, his voice low. "He's dying, Meg." "So what?" she snapped, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, I'm sorry, but you know what that place did to you? What they did to us. You really think they've changed?" He didn't answer. She sat beside him, softer now. "You don't owe them your life again. Not after everything we built here." Harry's voice cracked. "And yet, it's still my family." He looked down at the Queen's letter again. "You know what she wrote? If ever the line of succession divides the family, look to the one with compassion." "That's me, Meg." "She said that about me." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "No, she said that about the version of you they liked. The one they could control. The one before me." Her words hit like a slap. Harry stood abruptly, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think this is about control? My father is dying. My aunt is begging me to come home. My mother's words, my grandmother's words, are telling me I have a purpose beyond all this Hollywood crap. And all you can say is no. Because I know what happens if you go back," she said, tears welling. "They'll destroy us. They always do." He turned away, his voice breaking. "Maybe this isn't about us anymore." In London, William received a call he never wanted to take. "Your father has requested both of you," said the aide on the line. "He wants to see you and your brother together. One last time." William hesitated. "Harry's coming?" "Yes, sir. He's already on his way." The words hung in the air like a threat. Hours later, a private jet touched down in Aberdeen. Cameras caught only a brief glimpse. Red hair beneath a baseball cap, a gray hoodie pulled tight against the wind. Prince Harry was home. When his car pulled through the Balmoral gates, the air was eerily still. He hadn't seen the castle since the Queen's funeral. The sight of it now, the familiar stone walls, the mist curling over the hills, brought back memories that hurt more than he expected, and was waiting for him in the drawing room. She rose as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Harry," she said softly. "Aunt," and he replied, his voice cautious. For a long moment, they just stood there, the silence filled with everything unspoken. Finally, and broke it. "He's asked for you." Harry nodded. "I came as soon as I could." She studied him carefully. He looked older, harder, but also lost, like the boy who'd once run through these halls chasing after his mother's laughter. "You've read the letters," she said. "I have." And Harry hesitated. "I don't know what to believe anymore." And stepped closer. "Then believe this. Your father's last words are not about power. They're about peace." Harry swallowed hard. "Peace? After everything that's happened?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. Peace begins when you stop running." He looked away, blinking rapidly. "And Meghan?" Anne's face fell slightly. "That's a choice you'll have to make." Upstairs, Charles was awake but weak. The doctors had warned that he might not have much time left. Yet when Harry entered the room, the king's eyes opened and softened immediately. "Harry," he whispered. "Dad," Harry said, his voice trembling. Charles smiled faintly. "You came." "I did." For a few seconds, neither spoke. The years of anger, of interviews, of betrayal, all seemed to collapse into silence. Then Charles reached out his frail hand. Harry took it without hesitation. "I've made mistakes," Charles said. "But so have you. And yet, here we are." Harry nodded, tears filling his eyes. "You don't have to explain." "I do," Charles said, coughing lightly. "Because my last wish depends on it." Harry's heart pounded. "Your last wish?" Charles smiled weakly. "You already know." "And told you." Harry's breath caught. "You want me to?" "Yes." Charles interrupted gently. "I want you to take the crown." Harry froze. "I can't." "William." "William will understand one day," Charles said. "But right now, the monarchy needs something it hasn't had in decades. A heart that still believes in it." Harry shook his head. "I left. I turned my back on it. I can't just." "You can," Charles said. "But only if you return as your true self." He hesitated, his voice lowering. "And that means letting go of what keeps you divided." Harry's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what that meant. "You're asking me to choose," he whispered. Charles squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm asking you to heal." A single tear rolled down Harry's cheek. "And if I can't?" Charles smiled faintly. "Then let William carry it." "But I believe you can." The room went silent again, broken only by the soft beep of the monitors. Harry wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, part of him knew, this wasn't about duty or destiny. This was about forgiveness. And forgiveness was the hardest crown to wear of all. But before he could say anything more, a nurse rushed in, whispering urgently to Anne. The monitors began to scream. Charles's hand slipped from Harry's grasp. And in that moment, the world stopped. Anne's voice broke the silence. "Get the doctors." But it was too late. King Charles III had taken his final breath. And the letter he'd written, the one that named his successor, was now the most powerful document in Britain. But the question remained, would it be honored? Because in the shadows of the palace, others were already plotting to make sure it wouldn't be. The morning after King Charles's passing, London awoke to rain, the kind that seemed to linger just above the rooftops, refusing to fall, as though even the heavens were holding back tears. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered in silence. Black umbrellas dotted the mall, and flags flew at half-mast. The nation mourned its king. But inside the palace walls, grief was quickly being replaced by something far more dangerous. Power. The death of a monarch always triggers a storm of decisions, protocols, and ceremonies. But this time, there was something else in the air. Something unspoken. Something whispered in corners, carried in half-heard conversations between aides and advisors. The king's final wish. Was it true? Was it binding? And if so, who now wore the invisible crown? Princess Anne had barely slept. She sat at her desk in Clarence House, the king's sealed letter before her. It was written on his personal stationery, marked private and confidential. She had read it at least 10 times, each word echoing louder in her mind. My beloved Anne, if my time should come sooner than expected, I leave to you this final task. See that my truth is known, for the good of our family, for the peace of our realm, and for the redemption of the crown. My successor must be my second-born son, Harry. If he returns, if he lets go of what divides him. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Every word was now a weapon, every sentence a spark, because she knew what was coming next. An internal war. In another wing of the palace, Prince William stared at his reflection in the mirror. His black suit fit perfectly, but his face looked older, drawn, hollow. Grief sat heavily in his chest, but beneath it, anger burned quietly. He had seen the document. The royal secretary had shown it to him that morning, trembling, unsure what to do. William had read it once, twice, 3 times, waiting for some sign that it wasn't real. But there it was. His father's signature. His father's seal. His father's betrayal. Harry, he muttered under his breath. Always Harry. Catherine entered the room quietly, her expression unreadable. You have to say something, she said softly. William turned to her. And what exactly should I say? That my father replaced me on his deathbed? That my family believes my brother, the same one who abandoned everything, is now destined to be king? He laughed bitterly. If that's the monarchy's future, maybe it deserves to fall. Catherine flinched. Don't say that. He looked at her sharply. Why not? What's left to protect? A father who didn't trust me? A brother who sold our secrets to television hosts? Or a system that thinks emotion makes a better king than loyalty? She stepped closer. You know what Charles wanted. He wanted peace. William's jaw tightened. He wanted penance. He picked up the letter and stared at it again. He thought this would unite us. But all he's done is rip the crown apart. He looked up at his wife. If they think I'm just going to stand aside and watch this happen, they're wrong. At that same hour, Harry stood at the window of his old room at Balmoral, the same one he'd slept in as a boy. Outside, the hills were shrouded in fog. The castle felt emptier than ever. He hadn't cried yet. Not really. Maybe he didn't know how anymore. There was a knock on the door, and entered quietly, carrying a small velvet box. I thought you might want to see this, she said. He turned. What is it? She opened the box. Inside was the king's signet ring, the one he'd worn since his coronation. The gold was dull now, worn from years of use, but it glimmered faintly in the morning light. Harry stared at it, then looked up. I can't take that, and smiled sadly. He wanted you to have it. Harry shook his head. No, that belongs to William. Not according to him, and said, and not according to your mother, either. He looked confused. Mom, and hesitated, then sat down. Harry, there's something you need to understand. Your mother believed you'd have a choice one day, a choice that would define not just you, but the entire monarchy. She wrote about it. The Queen saw it too. And your father, he made sure you'd have the chance to decide. Harry looked down at the ring again. A choice, he repeated quietly. Between what? Anne's voice softened. Between love and legacy. He looked up sharply. You mean Meghan? And didn't answer directly. Your father's words were clear. You cannot lead divided. The throne requires sacrifice. It always has. Harry laughed bitterly. That's easy for you to say. You never had to choose between the people you love. Anne's eyes hardened slightly. You think I didn't? Every royal has. We just don't make our choices in front of cameras. She stood, her tone turning gentler. You don't have to decide now. But when the time comes, remember what he saw in you. Remember what your mother believed. She placed the box on the table and turned to leave. And, he called after her. Do you believe all this? Do you really think I was meant to be king? She paused at the door. I believe you were meant to come home. And then she was gone. By evening, the palace was a hive of activity. Preparations for the king's funeral were underway. State officials, clergy, and military officers filled the halls, each with their own agenda. But behind the scenes, the true battle was already in motion. A secret meeting had been called, an emergency session of the Privy Council. Its purpose, to determine whether the late king's final wish had any legal standing. And was there. So was William. The Archbishop, the Prime Minister, and a small handful of senior royals gathered in the Crimson Room under the flickering light of chandeliers. The Prime Minister began. Let us be clear. His Majesty's letter is not a formal decree. It was never presented before Parliament. In constitutional terms, The succession remains as it was. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, is next in line. William exhaled slowly, relief mixing with resentment. And wasn't finished. That may be true legally, she said. But the king's intent cannot be dismissed so easily. He made his wish known. To me. To the archbishop. To his advisers. It was his dying declaration. The archbishop nodded. Morally, it carries weight. The prime minister frowned. Morality does not determine monarchy, princess. Perhaps it should, and shot back. A murmur rippled through the room. William's voice cut through it. Enough. This is madness. My father was unwell. He was confused. And turned to him, her gaze steady. Was he confused when he reigned? When he restored the crown's image? When he spoke of unity? Or only when his wishes no longer benefited you? William's face flushed. How dare you? Don't lecture me about duty, William, she said quietly. I've lived it longer than you've been alive. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the prime minister stood. This discussion is over. The line of succession stands. Anne's hands clenched at her sides, but she said nothing more. She knew this battle wasn't going to be fought in chambers. It would be fought in the hearts of the people. And the people loved Harry. That night, across the world, television screens flickered with images of a grieving nation. Commentators speculated. Analysts debated. Public polls showed something shocking. An overwhelming 68% of Britons said they would support Harry if he were chosen as king. The headlines read, "Public favors Prince of the People. Harry for king? A nation divided." William watched the coverage in silence. The numbers spoke for themselves. He turned off the television and poured himself a drink. "Do they think this is a popularity contest?" he muttered. "He abandoned us." Catherine stood in the doorway, her expression heavy. He came back. William looked up sharply. "For how long? Until it gets difficult again?" She hesitated. Maybe this isn't about him anymore. Maybe it's about what the people want. William's voice hardened. The people don't decide the crown. Tradition does. He set down his glass, his voice low. If Harry wants to play king, he'll find out soon enough that crowns come with thorns. At Balmoral, Harry sat alone by the fireplace, staring at the ring in his hand. The flames reflected in the gold, dancing like ghosts of the past. He thought of his mother's smile, his father's voice, and steady gaze. He could still hear Charles's last words. "You can, but only if you return as your true self." But who was his true self now? The prince who had escaped the palace, or the man being called back to save it? He closed his hand around the ring. The metal felt cold against his skin. Heavy. Final. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll for the late king. Harry stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mist-covered hills. He whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time to come home." But even as he said it, he knew that home was no longer a place. It was a battlefield. And in the shadows of that battlefield, forces were already moving. People who would stop at nothing to keep him from the throne. Because the moment Harry returned to London, the war for the crown would truly begin. And not everyone planned for him to survive it. The next morning, London woke to a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that felt electric, like the air before a storm. Crowds lined the streets from Westminster to Windsor, waiting for the royal procession that would carry King Charles's body to its final resting place. Black horses pawed at the wet pavement, their polished hooves gleaming beneath the overcast sky. Bells tolled across the city, deep and mournful. But beyond the ceremonial perfection, tension thrummed beneath every bowed head, every whispered prayer. The king was dead. The nation was grieving. Yet the question no one dared ask out loud hung like a shadow over the funeral procession. Who would wear the crown next? For the first time in modern British history, the answer wasn't clear. In the royal car behind the hearse, Princess Anne sat between her two nephews, William and Harry. The silence between them was deafening. Harry's face was pale, composed, his eyes fixed on the coffin draped in the royal standard. William's jaw was tight, his hands clasped so hard his knuckles were white. The brothers hadn't spoken since the night before. Their only communication had been a glance, half recognition, half accusation, and felt the tension radiating from both sides of her. She wanted to speak, to bridge the canyon that had grown between them, but she knew this wasn't the moment. Still, she sensed the words rising anyway. "Your father loved you both," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the car. Neither responded. She continued, more firmly. He wanted peace. Don't let his legacy be a war. William exhaled sharply. He started the war. Harry turned his head, his tone even. He tried to end it. That broke the silence. William's voice rose. You think this is peace? You flying in for a funeral, after years of throwing this family to the wolves? You call that peace? Harry's eyes met his. You think hiding behind silence is any better? And raised a hand, her tone low but commanding. Enough. Both men looked away, seething in their separate corners. Outside, the crowds waved flags and threw flowers as the carriage passed. The world saw unity, grace, the image of a family mourning together. But inside that car, the reality was far more fragile. 3 people bound by blood, divided by everything else. When they reached Westminster Abbey, the air inside felt heavy with incense and history. The vaulted ceilings echoed with the choir's hymn as the casket was carried down the aisle. The world watched as 2 sons followed their father one last time, one heir by right, the other by heart. From her seat in the front row, Camilla's face was stone. She hadn't spoken to, and since their confrontation. To her, this funeral wasn't just an ending. It was a threat to everything she and Charles had built. If Harry took the crown, her role, her legacy, her identity would vanish. The Archbishop's sermon spoke of forgiveness, unity, and duty. But as his words echoed through the abbey, Harry felt them pressing down on him. Forgiveness, unity, duty. They weren't words anymore. They were choices. And the one person he couldn't stop thinking about wasn't even in the building. Back in California, Meghan sat on the sofa, the television flickering before her. The BBC feed showed Harry walking behind his father's coffin, the crowd silent, the choir's voices rising like ghosts. Her chest tightened. She had told him not to go, told him nothing good would come of it. But deep down, watching him now, she understood what he was chasing. Closure. Maybe redemption. Maybe something neither of them could ever name. She muted the television and leaned back, whispering to herself, "Come back home, Harry." But the truth was, he already was home. Just not hers. After the service, the royal family gathered in the private chapel for one final moment of farewell. No cameras. No public spectacle. Just family and history colliding in quiet ceremony. The Archbishop handed in a sealed scroll. His Majesty requested this be read after the service, he said softly. Anne's pulse quickened. She knew what it was, the formal record of the king's final declaration. The family gathered around the coffin. William stood beside Catherine, his expression unreadable. Harry lingered a few steps away, uncertain if he even belonged in this circle anymore, and opened the scroll and began to read, her voice trembling slightly. I, Charles Philip Arthur George, by the grace of God King of the United Kingdom, do declare this, my final wish, that my second-born son, Prince Henry Charles Albert David, Duke of Sussex, should be considered as my rightful successor, should he choose to return to royal service and reaffirm his commitment to the realm. Gasps echoed through the chapel. Even the Archbishop looked pale, and continued, her tone steady now. This wish is not to diminish the worth of my eldest, the Prince of Wales, whose loyalty I revere. But I believe the strength of the crown lies not only in duty, but in compassion. And compassion I have seen most vividly in my younger son. When she finished, silence swallowed the room. William stepped forward slowly, his face white. This is madness, he said, barely above a whisper. It's not legal. It's not binding. Harry didn't move. His heart pounded, but he felt strangely calm. Camilla's voice broke through the stillness, sharp and cold. This will destroy us. Do you hear me? Destroy us. And rolled the scroll shut. Or save us. William turned on Harry. If you love this family, you'll reject it. Right here. Right now. Harry met his brother's eyes, searching for the boy he once knew. The one who shared his jokes, his fears, his mother. But that boy was gone. What stood before him now was a man hardened by years of duty and resentment. I'm not here to take anything from you, Harry said softly. I never was. Then prove it, William shot back. Say you won't do it. Harry hesitated. The weight of the moment pressed on him. I can't, he said finally. Not yet. The room erupted. Voices clashed, Camilla shouting about betrayal, William demanding loyalty, and pleading for calm. The Archbishop tried to intervene, his words lost in the chaos. Through it all, Harry just stood there, silent, the noise around him fading into a dull roar. Because deep down, he knew the truth. His father's wish wasn't about power. It was a test, and he wasn't sure he was ready to take it. That night, and found Harry sitting alone in the palace garden, the cold wind whipping through the trees. "Quite the day," she said, approaching softly. He gave a humorless laugh. "You could say that." She sat beside him. "You handled it well." "Did I?" he asked quietly. "Because it feels like I just made everything worse." And looked up at the night sky. Sometimes the truth does that before it sets things right. He turned to her. "You really think any of them will ever accept it? William? Camilla? The government?" She smiled faintly. "The crown has survived worse. It always does." He looked down at his hands. "I don't even know if I want it." Anne's voice softened. "Wanting it isn't the point. Being willing, that's what matters." Harry sighed. "And what about Meghan?" And hesitated. "That's a decision only you can make." He nodded slowly. "If I go back, I lose her. If I stay, I lose everything else." "Maybe," and said, "you'll find there's more than one kind of love worth keeping." He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Your father loved you enough to let you go," she said quietly. "Now you'll have to love someone enough to do the same." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Anne stood, her coat fluttering in the wind. "Tomorrow," she said, "the council meets again. They'll want your answer." Harry watched her walk away, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the garden. He turned back toward the palace, its windows glowing faintly against the dark. Somewhere inside, history was waiting for his choice. He closed his eyes, whispering to the night, "What do I do, Mum?" But no answer came. Only the wind, carrying the distant sound of church bells tolling once more across the city. And deep within those bells, in their echoing sorrow, Harry thought he heard something else. A calling, a choice, and the faint, unmistakable whisper of destiny. But what that destiny demanded of him, the world was about to find out. The day after the funeral, the rain finally stopped, but the chill that hung over London didn't lift. The palace gates were draped in wreaths and condolence letters, but behind those gates, something darker was unfolding. Inside the royal residence, grief had given way to tension. Every hallway echoed with hushed arguments. Advisors moved like shadows, papers tucked under their arms. Guards avoided eye contact. The world saw a kingdom in mourning. But within the palace, it felt more like a battlefield waiting for its first shot. Because in just a few hours, the Privy Council would reconvene, this time to announce the official succession. The question that haunted every mind in Britain was the same. Would the king's wish be honored or buried with him? Princess Anne was the first to arrive. She walked through the great hall in silence, her heels clicking against the marble floor. To the world, she looked as composed as ever, shoulders straight, face unreadable. But inside, she was unraveling. She had kept her brother's final promise. She had revealed his wish, even though it tore the family apart. But now, she faced an even greater test. Because if the council refused to acknowledge Charles's letter, it would all have been for nothing. As she entered the council chamber, she caught sight of William standing by the window, staring out at the gray sky. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes deep as bruises. Catherine stood beside him, whispering something and couldn't hear. And then there was Harry, standing alone at the far end of the room. No entourage, no wife, just him, his hands clasped tightly, his face a mask of calm that didn't quite reach his eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the Prime Minister entered, followed by the Archbishop and the royal legal advisors. The room fell silent. "Let us begin," the Prime Minister said, his voice clipped, rehearsed. "We are here to finalize the matter of succession following His Majesty King Charles III's passing." He adjusted his glasses, glancing briefly toward Anne. "The Council has reviewed His Majesty's final written declaration. While it is not legally binding, it carries significant moral weight. Our purpose today is to decide whether that moral intention should influence the line of succession." Anne's voice cut through the silence. "It should do more than influence it. It should define it." A murmur spread across the table. William's voice came next, calm but cold. "My Anne is mistaken. The monarchy has survived for centuries because it honors law, not sentiment." And turned toward him. "The monarchy has survived because it honors the people. And the people," she paused, her eyes sweeping the room. "Want Harry?" The Archbishop cleared his throat uneasily. "With respect, public opinion cannot determine divine right." Anne's voice sharpened. "And yet divine right has torn this family apart more than once." William's expression hardened. "You're not suggesting we turn the crown into a popularity contest?" "No," and said evenly. "I'm suggesting we turn it into a reflection of humanity." The Prime Minister raised a hand to steady the argument. "Enough. The matter is clear. By law, the Prince of Wales remains heir apparent." However, he paused. "Given the King's written wish and the unprecedented public support, an alternative proposal has been raised." William's eyes narrowed. "What proposal?" The Prime Minister looked down at his papers. "That Prince Harry be granted the